September 1st, 1944. The road is a wet ribbon under blackout hoods, and the only light is a narrow knife of dust-colored glow slanting off the gravel. Canvas flaps snap. Diesel breath stings the throat. A driver taps the wheel with two raw knuckles to stay awake, then bites his lip as the convoy lurches forward past a hand-painted sign. A red circle, an arrow, the word that rules the night, Red Ball. If you want more Untold turning points like this, hit subscribe to What If Wars. Wind pushes the rain sideways across Normandy, and the trucks keep coming. 2.5-ton GMCs, 5-ton haulers, engines shouldering the grade out of the beach, dumps behind Cherbourg and the hedgerow towns, Isigny, Carentan, hauling what the spearheads crave more than anything else. Gasoline, glinting in jerry cans and drums stacked to the canvas roof. The front has outrun the rails. Antwerp will be taken soon, but the port won't breathe for weeks. Pluto, the pipeline under the ocean, is stretching inland, but it's a thin vein in a giant's arm. Tonight the heartbeat is rubber on wet stone, gasoline by the gallon lashed down with rope. He tells you his name over the engine, Private Eddie Carter, 21, hands calloused, eyelids heavy. He checks his mirror and sees only a hooded Firefly, where the next truck's blackout lamp should be. Another 50 miles, the corporal said. Then a truck head inland, a dump where drums come off, and the road curls back to the coast. Beside a crossroads north of St. Lo, a white helmet blooms out of the dark, military police. 2 fingers, a whistle, a sweep of the wrist that parts the river of trucks the way a keel parts water. That's Sergeant Frank Malloy's corner, and every hour tonight he will keep 1,000 tons of gasoline moving with nothing but a whistle, a flashlight, and the stubborn conviction that order can exist in rain. Eddie rolls past stacked signs on the right-of-way. Red Ball, priority traffic, no stopping. The convoy breathes like one long animal. Accelerate, coast, brake, a steel spine stretching south and east toward Chartres and beyond. Somewhere out there, tankers sit in hedgerow bivouacs with fuel gauges dropping toward the ugly letter E. In the morning, paper maps will show arrows that look confident. Thick brush strokes pushing toward the German border. But in the dark, the arrow is this. A kid hunched over a wheel, hooded lamps nudged down to slits. 60 gallons of gas burning to push 200 miles worth of gas toward men who will burn it by noon. Rain becomes a mist, and the road opens into a long, straight run. The convoy climbs to 30. Eddie feels the truck hum at a sweet spot. The way a voice hits a note and holds. He thinks about home, about the letter in his breast pocket getting damp, about the way the guys in the loading yard called the drums money, the way one of them rapped a knuckle on a jerry can and said, "This is what wins or loses, right here, not medals, this." The statement won't leave his head. He tries to count the trucks he can't see. 6,000 in rotation some days, they said. 12,000 tons a day on the best ones. 3/4 of the driver's men who look like him, who learned to steer an army into a continent and rarely see their names in the paper. Numbers like that don't feel like numbers at night. They feel like a wind that doesn't stop. At Malloy's Junction, the world chokes down to a single wet circle of light. A French trucker tried to slip through an hour ago, pressing a non-priority load into the stream like a stone into a fast river. Malloy chased him off with the whistle, and a short sentence in a bad accent, and the kind of stare that travels without translation. "You stop this, you stop everything," he tells Eddie as the truck idles by. One wreck here, and it's 2 hours of nothing. Eddie nods, but the words land deeper than courtesy. He sees the math. 20 trucks backed up, becomes 50, becomes 200. A bridge 10 miles ahead can't take more than one at a time. A hill past Carentan eats speed and spits out smoke if men lean too hard on the pedal. The road is a narrow throat, and tonight the army is trying to breathe through it. High in the cab, cold seeping through the seat, Eddie thinks about the talk at noon. How Antwerp was a name without a heartbeat yet. How the rails were still being stitched back together, sleeper by sleeper. How the pipeline's inland spur wasn't near enough to the spearheads. He remembers a captain with oil under his nails drawing a line with a pencil and tapping the point where the line went thin. "We can move it by truck," the captain said, "but we pay for it in parts and people." The words stuck because he was a part, and the truck was a part, and the bill came due mile by mile. Somewhere to the east, under tarps and thatch, artillery crews clean breech faces and check fuses. To the south, tankers dream twisted, sitting on turrets with their boots on the glacis plate, listening to the cool tick of metal. To the north, the beach dumps glow under rain as cranes swing and drums thud onto beds like fists on a door. In between is this artery, this one-way loop, where signs with a red dot grease the gears better than any oil. If the front runs dry for 48 hours, the grand arrows on the map snap like chalk lines in the sun. The talk becomes about stopping, not driving, about what ground to hold instead of what ground to take. Eddie downshifts when the road tips up, and the engine growls, and the truck shoulders the grade. A drum rolls, thunks against the headboard, settles. He breathes out a swear that fogs in the cab and clears. On the far side, the grade falls and the speed creeps past 25, past 30, a little dangerous under blackout. Malloy would chew his ear for that. He eases back, watches the hooded glow smear across the wet, and measures the night not by miles, but by checkpoints. This bend, that hedgerow, the stand of poplars that survive every war. When he passes them, the fear loosens a notch. It doesn't let go. A wiper gives up and starts a slow, useless skid. He leans left to keep his good eye on the road. A truck ahead pops a downshift too late, and the rear steps out, then catches, the whole line tightening like a cable. Eddie's boot hovers over the brake. He hears the drum of rain on canvas and someone laughing 2 trucks back, because laughter keeps your hands steady. Diesel breath, wet wool, the bitter edge of coffee from a bottle cap. Every sense says, keep moving. The orders say, keep moving. The clock says, keep moving. The whistle again, a long blast, Malloy's arm cutting the air. The junction opens like a gate. Eddie drops a gear and noses through, and Malloy steps into the rain and watches the line stitch itself back into the night. Behind him, men in the dark drag a busted fender off the verge before it becomes tomorrow's disaster. Ahead of him, somewhere he can't see, a bridge will groan under a sequence of axles and then stand relieved in the quiet like a chest after a cough. The convoy swings east. Clouds hang low over fields trampled to mud. A farmhouse window burns a dull orange under blackout shades, and a dog barks once and loses interest. The road smooths under new gravel, and the hum returns, steady as a pulse. Eddie counts to 100, and then to 100 again. Past midnight, the rain thickens until the hood is a slick black triangle, and the world narrows to the next 20 yards. He thinks of nothing, and then of everything, and then of nothing again. What happens if the front runs dry for 48 hours? The answer is out there, waiting at a truckhead where a corporal with a clipboard counts drums like a man counting minutes of someone else's life. We'll find out when the sun comes up over the depots and the maps, and when the engines that never cool begin to sound tired. For now, the road is the only honest thing left. It asks for nothing except forward, and it gives back only the thudding drum of fuel on wood and the promise that direction is enough. The rain hardens, the trucks shoulder into it, and somewhere, just past the curve, we will see where this road saves the day, and where it begins to break. Dawn never really arrives on the coast. It just bleaches the rain. At a dump behind Isigny, cranes creak and cables sing, and the drums start flying. They come off pallets like coins from a purse, 55 gallons each. Thud, thud, thud into the wooden beds of CCKW 2.5 tonners and big 5 tons with canvas arched like wet catbacks. A clerk rips carbon paper with cold fingers. Trip ticket, origin stamp, destination scribble, turnaround goal, and snaps it to Eddie Carter's clipboard. The numbers are a drumbeat of their own. Aim for 12,000 tons today if the roads hold. Keep 6,000 trucks in rotation if the drivers don't fold. Average 20 to 25 miles an hour when the weather shows mercy. Less when the sky presses down like a hand. Eddie climbs the wheel well, slaps the tailboard twice to signal the load chief, and feels the truck sag under the last row of drums. A corporal yells over wind, "Tie 'em like you tie your life," and Eddie believes him because the road will test every knot. He snakes hemp rope through staves and over chime rims, cinches them until the ropes hum, and drops into the seat that still remembers last night's hours. The engine coughs, then settles into a bass note you feel through your boots. The convoy nudges forward, cues off a white-gloved MP at the gate, and slides onto the outbound lane, the one-way artery that makes this whole thing possible. A mile out, the red ball signs multiply. Whiteboard, red circle, arrow, And the rules harden. No stopping on the loop, no cross-traffic without an MP. Convoys spaced like beads on string. They built it this way to strip away collisions, to turn a snarl of lanes into a single, obedient current. It works, mostly. Traffic that used to tangle in village squares now slants through on the priority road, while locals stand under eaves and count trucks the way farmers count swallows in spring. The first choke is a narrow bridge patched after a blown charge. Malloy's men own it. Sergeant Frank Malloy plants his boots on slick planks and turns 100 independent wills into one. Left hand high, palm open, halt, right hand carving the air, U, through. Whistle blasts in a code you learn by watching. A French lorry edges nose first toward the bridge lip, and Malloy's head snaps. 2 MPs jog over, tap the windshield, point to the shoulder. The driver throws his hands up. Not today, not on this lane. Eddie watches a 5-ton crawl onto the timbers, sees the bridge bow the smallest, scariest amount, hears every bolt in the world complain, and then it's Eddie's turn. 10 miles an hour on wood is a prayer. The drum rings under his palms through the wheel. Then stone again, and the truck breathes. By mid-morning, the loop stretches clear to the truck head west of Chartres. The long straight that follows is where the speed cap matters most. An MP on a motorcycle paces the column, arm out flat, chopping motions. Hold it at 25. Don't let the line string out and don't bunch up. Bunching means accordion. Accordion means fenders kiss and radiators steam. Eddie can feel how the one-way loop prevents the old killers. Head-on glances and blind bends, surprise cross-traffic. But the loop breeds its own enemy, monotony. It's why they swap drivers on the fly. At a lay-by, hacked from a hedgerow, a spare man, Private Randall, eyes red, scarf gray, clambers up as Eddie drifts the truck into a slow roll. 2 steps, a grab, a slide into the passenger seat, a thigh against the handbrake, a breath. And the change is made without killing momentum. Randall takes the wheel. Eddie stretches the kind of stretch that pulls pain from bones, then fumbles for a corked bottle with coffee, as black as axle grease. His shoulders rattle with the road. He tells himself he's off duty for 20 minutes. His hands don't believe him. The truckhead is a field flattened into an idea. Bulldozers have bullied it into lanes. Engineers have staked signs with arrows and chalked letters. Cranes swing in jerks. A sergeant with a tally slate shouts numbers and makes them true by shouting. Drums come off like hailstones, hitting damp boards and skittering. 20 minutes! Someone yells, and a team of men proves him a liar and a prophet at once. Sometimes 20, sometimes 35, if a sling slips or a drum splits. Eddie stands by the cab, while a mechanic ducks under the chassis with a wrench in his teeth and a can of oil like a baby on his hip. The pit is a trench lined with makeshift boards. There's a growing collection of bones, a spring leaf from a wrecked CCKWS, a drive shaft with a kink, a box of brake shoes that still have a quarter life. Cannibalization is the ugly word everyone uses without shame. Parts are coins and they spend them all day. A clerk scratches a time, wheels chalked at 10:12, load off at 10:36, a promise to reload for backhaul by 11:05, and the line curls back toward the coast. Eddie watches a truck limp past with a marker tied to the mirror, a strip of white cloth that means, "Nurse me home." He counts 4 in 100 today that look like that. Clutch slipping, tire chewed to canvas, radiator hissing through a soldier's gum. The loop, this clean one-way ribbon, has cut the collision rate to a fraction of what it was when the roads were two-way chaos. But breakdowns are their own tide. That's the math the captain meant. You can bend a system to move faster than rail for a week, maybe 2, but you pay it in steel and sleep. On the way back to the coast, the jam finds them at a town square that was never meant to host a moving warehouse. The square pinches, the gutter floods, a cart left by someone's grandfather bites into the lane, and a 5-ton kisses a wall with its right fender. It's minor until it isn't. Horns layer, diesel low idle stacks into a single animal grumble. Malloy arrives like a storm in a white helmet and does the old ship magic. Stop that lane, pull that truck, lean 6 men into that fender and bend it with muscle and 2 crowbars while the driver rides the clutch and weeps. Eddie feels time leaking. He checks his watch and calculates the loss the way a quartermaster does. 15 minutes here is 45 down the line. 45 is a missed bridge window. Miss the bridge and you're idling on wood at dusk. Dusk is when accidents breed. They break the jam. The loop breathes again. The red ball signs seem to glow brighter in wet air, and Eddie almost laughs at the audacity of a painted circle, telling miles of fuel what to do. But it works. A system that looks simple from a desk. This lane out, that lane back, MPs at every hinge. Saves minutes at each hinge, and minutes are what beat hunger and emptiness and cold tanks. For this week, for this narrow window before rails and ports and pipelines catch up, trucks move fuel faster. Not cheaper, not kinder, not safer, but faster. The coast comes up like a gray wall with gulls sewn into it. The dump at Carentan is a city of drums under rain. Eddie's ticket gets torn again. The clerk writes a turnaround time, the way a foreman writes production on a blackboard. Half bravado, half prayer. Eddie wipes water from his nose and tastes salt and diesel, and something like pennies. He swaps out with Randall again so the kid can sleep for a quarter hour, then takes the wheel and feels the cab take the shape of his back. Behind him, a maintenance crew ghosts around a truck on blocks, hunting a part that isn't there yet, deciding which vehicle in the line gives up the part instead. Somewhere, a shovel throws dirt onto a shallow trench that wasn't here yesterday. When the column launches inland a second time, Eddie notices the small ways the loop protects them, the way crossroads without MPs are chained shut, the way static sentries hold pedestrians with a palm and a smile, the way French kids learn to count in twos because trucks come in pairs, headlight slits blinking like tired eyes. He drives with the sense that he is inside a system, just barely fast enough to outrun the consequences of itself. Malloy's whistle cuts through rain again at the bridge, and Eddie slows, and the timbers complain, and someone on the far bank claps once as if applause is ballast. Midday folds into afternoon. The log sheet says he's done a cycle, coast to Truckhead and back, in just under 10 hours including the jam. Better than yesterday by 1 hour, worse than the bravado, goal by 2. He can feel the engine growing old between his hands. He can feel the road teaching him its grammar. You don't fight the loop, you let it carry you. He can feel, too, the price that's being paid just out of sight. Brake shoes worn to metal prayer, sidewalls cut by rubble, a tally of injuries that rarely make a map. By evening, the convoy is a living thing again, lamps hooded, rain refreshed. Eddie rests his forehead on the wheel for 1 second at a halt, and snatches a few grains of sleep, then jerks awake at a bump and eases forward. A week from now, if the rails knit together, if Antwerp's mouth opens to swallow ships, if the pipeline pushes inland like a root, this road won't have to carry a whole war by itself. This week, it does. And if anyone needs proof, they can count the drums leaving the coast and the trucks that don't come back whole. The road can outrun the trains for now, but the engines tell the truth when they idle. Nothing this loud stays cheap for long. By nightfall, the road admits its secret. It eats what it carries. A CCKW that drinks 6 or 7 miles to the gallon will burn 20-30 gallons on a long loop. And when the round trip stretches past 200 miles, the math nips at your heels. Move a river of fuel by truck, and a creek of it vanishes into carburetors and exhaust. No one writes that on the signs, but every driver knows it in his bones. Eddie hears it in the idle, an engine's thirsty throat swallowing a little of tomorrow to deliver today. Rain slides off the hood in silver cords. Fog presses low along the hedgerows. Malloy's whistle is somewhere behind, thinner now in the heavy air, and Eddie eases the truck toward a narrow bridge with timber ribs and stone shoulders rubbed smooth by a century of carts. The approach is slick. The line slows. A 5-ton ahead takes the bend skinnier than it should, rear wheels kissing the wet curb, and then it happens. The bed kicks out. The trailer angle sharpens. Metal screams, and the whole rig jackknifes into a shape you never want to see in a mirror. There's an instant of silence that isn't quiet at all. Then boots hammer planks, chains drag, someone yells for chocks. An MP sprints from the far end, coat unbuttoned, white helmet flashing, and plants himself between fear and panic with a palm like a wall. "Hold the line," he shouts, the words flat and final. No forward, no reverse. Nobody breathes unless I say. Eddie kills the engine, and the road inhales his silence. Diesel fades in layers. Rain speaks again on canvas. Men move in the wet without thinking about names. A chain goes around an axle, through a frame hole, back to a winch that looks too small for men's hopes. The bridge groans when the stuck truck answers the pull, sliding an inch, 2 inches, stops, slides again, then bumps hard into a straight that isn't straight enough. Someone tosses a tarp over a sheared fender so no one slices a palm in the dark. Another man kneels with his cheek against cold wood to sight the line of tire to plank, breathing sawdust and river. Malloy arrives like a knife, takes in the angles in one glance, and turns the whole mess into a plan with 3 sentences and a whistle code. 15 minutes dribble away, then 20. By 30, the cost is a living thing. Headlights, hooded slits, stack into the distance like stitches on black cloth. Eddie climbs down and walks his hand along the rope on his drums, checking tension by feel, not sight. He counts the trucks backed up until counting becomes an act of faith. 50? 70? How far does the line run when it runs out of patience? He thinks of the captain's pencil tapping the thin part of the line. Here we are, he thinks. Here. The winch whines. The stuck truck shudders, twitches, straightens. Men lean their weight into steel like wrestlers, pushing the rear just far enough that geometry becomes grace. Malloy lifts his hand, stills the movement, then drops his chin once. The driver feathers the clutch, the rig creeps, wood sings, the bridge trembles and holds. A cheer starts and dies at Malloy's glare. Save it for later. He waves the first waiting truck forward, palm down, easing speed with a magician's fingers. Eddie climbs back into the cab, and his heart, which has been parked in his throat, finally descends. By the time the line moves again, 40 minutes have bled into the road. At 25 miles an hour, that's a dozen miles of trucks congealed into a single frustration. The cost is not just time, it's danger. Dusk has wagged its gray finger over the ridge. Dusk breeds misjudgment. Misjudgment breeds metal. Eddie swallows coffee that has gone cold and mean. He adjusts the wiper that smears more than it clears and thinks about how a single wrong angle can starve men he will never meet 100 miles away. Farther inland, where the loop curls through a market town, another kind of danger waits. Not rain, not slick wood, but the part of war that looks like human nature under strain. On a side street full of shuttered shops, a boy in a cap jabs a finger toward a jerry can roped to a tailgate and whispers to a man whose jacket hangs too loose. Gasoline is money that burns. The whisper travels. A siphon hose appears like a worm from wet earth. Eddie sees the shape of it in his mirror and breaks just enough to make the idea hard. The hose disappears. The man laughs too loud and points at the sky like weather is a joke. 2 streets later, Malloy's second detachment has a little theater set up. A table in the rain, a ledger open, 3 confiscated cans lined like guilty soldiers, and a message delivered without speeches. This road feeds an army. You don't take food off a wounded man's tray. The clampdown carries teeth. Trucks stop at random spots now and then. MPs check seals and trip tickets, glance at odometers, ask quiet questions that land louder than shouts. Most drivers meet them with yawns and ink-stained fingers. Once in a while, there's a missing can and a shrug. Malloy doesn't write sermons. He writes names, and names travel. The rumor that follows, that a man caught twice rides a desk and never the loop again, does more to protect drums than barbed wire. As the night thickens, the paradox of the loop grows clearer. It is safer than chaos. It is still dangerous. Collision rates are a fraction of what they were in two-way madness, yet breakdowns breed like rain puddles in rutted lanes. Eddie counts 4 trucks limping per 100, and when the line stretches, limpers become anchors. Tires wear to whisper thin, brake shoes grind to sermons, radiators belch ghostly plumes. Every mile is a receipt. Pay it now in parts and sleep, or pay it tomorrow in momentum lost. Somewhere behind drizzle and blackout cloth, a desk lamp burns over a map. The paper looks like a clean world until you lay shortages across it. A major runs a finger along a penciled route and stops at numbers in the margin. Fuel allocated, fuel delivered, fuel in transit, fuel eaten by the act of moving fuel. He writes a memo in a hand that has lost its patience for adjectives. Patton gets this many gallons. Another thrust gets less. A third waits, bright red arrow resting its nose on a river it won't cross tomorrow. He signs the allocation and knows exactly what it means. Tonight's convoy will decide the morning's verbs: advance, hold, refuel, delay. The memo rides the night like a quiet order, and it finds men long before it finds their names. Eddie feels it as a rumor at a truck head. Somebody's getting the lion's share at first light. Malloy feels it as a new edge on drivers' nerves. More horns, tighter gaps, men trying to outrun a decision already made. The road doesn't acknowledge strategy, but it enforces it. It will move what it can move, as fast as humans can keep choices from turning into noise, and then it will present the bill at the next bridge, the next bend, the next bad idea in a southbound alley. Near midnight, Eddie rolls past the place where the 5-ton kissed the wall hours ago. The gouge is dark and wet and already old. He thinks about the hidden arithmetic that has governed his entire day. Gallons burned to deliver gallons, minutes lost to save hours, the sentence written at a desk that turns into someone else's dawn. He brushes 2 fingers across the damp of the dash, like a man crossing himself before sleep. The loop carries him onward. The engine swallows another mouthful of tomorrow and asks for more. Early September 1944 writes new names on the map, but the numbers keep their grip. Antwerp falls into Allied hands in the first week, yet it's a mouth sewn shut, the Scheldt estuary choked with mines and guns. So the port breathes in theory and coughs in practice. Rail crews push east, hammering spikes into ties that still smell of creosote and smoke, but bridges need girders, locomotives need boilers, and capacity limps behind the appetite of an army. Pluto snakes inland, a steel vein under fields and lanes, pressure gauges trembling as pumps thrum. It helps, then falters against distance. So, the road keeps the tempo for now, drumming fuel inland in 55-gallon beats, and the men who run that road learn to talk like accountants with grease on their hands. Somewhere behind blackout curtains and a guard with a clipboard, a briefing starts on the dot. The room is small enough that maps borrow the walls, and the air tastes like pencil shavings and coffee. Arrows stab east, one thick stroke across Belgium, another down toward the Moselle and the Saar. Paper tabs cling to railheads in recovery, to truckheads groaning with drums, to bridges still wearing bandages. A staff officer touches a column of figures with a chewed nail. Gasoline on hand, gasoline inbound by road, by rail, by pipeline. Expected issues, burn rates. He reads the sentence everyone already knows. You can advance 1 fist at full stretch or 2 at half speed. Choose. For a moment, the room holds its breath around the simple word. Patton wants fuel for a lunge that makes maps look foolish by mid-month. British formations eye the north and east, the corridor toward the Low Countries, a promise that becomes a plan with a date stamped on it. The American supply men stand in the middle, talking ton miles and axle counts, and how many gallons a day the Red Ball can squeeze out of exhausted trucks if the weather behaves and the bridges don't pout. A colonel, who hasn't slept through a night since August, clears his throat and says what roads say when you listen. We can push a decisive weight forward, but we can't feed every arrow at once. Pick the verbs you want your headlines to use in 3 days. Leap, hold, refuel, wait. It isn't anger, it's a rasp, the sound of pride scraping against physics. And it doesn't last. The map accepts the choice the same way the road accepts rain, without apology. Allocations travel west to east like orders wrapped in numbers. A forward corps will get enough to move at dawn. Another will sit and count hours like beads, swapping spark plugs and chewing the gristle off canned beef. The coalition keeps its face even. There are edges under the politeness. There always are when men are spending blood and luck. But the edges dull against the one fact that outranks ego. Whoever gets the gas has to use it well. Outside, the tide turns 1 crate at a time. Railheads that were whispers in August thicken to a hum. A repaired bridge throws its first shadow at noon and still holds at dusk. A locomotive coughs up the grade with 10 cars of drums, and then, a day later, with 15. The ledger nods. Car count up. Turn time down. Track gangs step aside and smile with every passing whistle because noise means life. Pipeline crews spool steel and bolt flanges, and the inch-by-inch arithmetic of pressure and distance starts to favor them. Antwerp sits like a promise you can taste. Not yet, not today. But the week after next is closer than it looks when the wind comes off the channel and carries the smell of salt and oil into the depots. Eddie Carter doesn't get the briefing, but he feels its verdict in his bones the way a drummer feels tempo through a floorboard. The afternoon convoy is smaller by a thumb's width, gaps wider, horns quieter. Somewhere a new truck head opens 10 miles closer to the line, a field rolled flat by engineers who know how to make room where there isn't any. The round trip shaves an hour off itself and doesn't even brag. On the return leg, he passes a flat car on a repaired spur stacked with drums and thinks, for the first time in days, that maybe the road can hand the weight back without snapping in the process. Malloy feels it too. His bridge isn't kinder, timbers still complain, and a 5-ton still makes wood feel like a memory when it rolls onto the span. But the jams unwind quicker because fewer desperate men are trying to squeeze through the same square inch of night. He pockets his whistle for a breath at his junction, watches a motorcycle MP pace the line at a sensible 25, and lets his jaw unclench. The habit of severity doesn't vanish. It loosens. He even nods at a French lorry edged respectfully off the loop with its driver's cap in his hands. The man grins and holds up an apple like a peace token. Malloy doesn't take it. He smiles anyway. The loop is still the artery, but you can feel capillaries knitting back together all around it. A yard crane at a rebuilt siding swings a load of boxes with the bored grace of a dancer. A depot clerk holds a manifest that lists pipeline receipts next to truck receipts and doesn't scoff. A quartermaster who looked hollow yesterday has color today because he can promise a battalion commander fuel tomorrow without crossing his fingers in his pocket. Even the mechanics in the pit at the coastal dump look up when a train horn drifts over the hedgerow and trade a glance that says, "The road can breathe." Night leans in. Eddie sets his brakes at a gate where yesterday he idled 20 minutes and tonight he rolls in 5. His log shows 2 full cycles instead of 1.5. He can feel the difference in the way the cab stops fighting his shoulders and starts cradling them. Randall snores for 7 straight minutes without jerking awake to a horn. A mess corporal hands Eddie a tin mug of soup and a slice of bread that hasn't learned the word stale yet. And for a whole minute, the world is a simple exchange. Heat for cold, salt for rain. Before he climbs back in, Eddie hears the kind of rumor men want to believe. Tomorrow's haul shorter by 10 miles. New forward dump taking pressure off the long leg. A rail shuttle bringing in drums so Red Ball can do what it does best. Bridge the gap, not carry the continent. He doesn't celebrate. He pockets the rumor like a coin and tests its weight with his thumb. Then he slides behind the wheel, checks the ropes with 2 tugs, and looks down the lane that has owned his days. The calendar on the wall of the clerk's shack has an X over September 7th. Antwerp is a word people say without shrugging now. The Scheldt is a word they spit and then square their shoulders at. The pipeline gauge climbs a hair and holds. Tracks shine where weeds were. All of it adds up to a small, private luxury Eddie hasn't allowed himself since August, the calculation of sleep. If the loop truly shortens tomorrow and the bridge behaves and the jam stays a story instead of a forecast, he can steal 90 minutes horizontal instead of folded. He does the math with a caution learned from Rain. 90 minutes is a kingdom. 90 minutes is a man looking at dawn with eyes that don't burn. He eases the clutch and the truck joins the line, steady, patient, almost gentle. Somewhere ahead, a repaired siding wants to prove itself. Somewhere behind, a pump station hums like a hive. The road that kept the heartbeat alive is learning to share the pulse. Eddie lets the gear lever settle under his palm and smiles at nothing, which is everything. Tonight, the loop is still king. Tomorrow, it might be just a road again, and that would be the kindest promotion in the world. September 1st comes back to find us at dawn, thin light rinsing the hedgerows until the fields show their seams. The rain has softened to a mist that clings to canvas and hair. Engines cough awake one by one, like men clearing their throats before a vow. Eddie Carter sits sideways on his running board with a tin of something hot between his palms, steam threading past his face in little flags. The night's grime has drawn dark commas under his eyes. He touches the letter in his pocket to make sure it's still there, a habit more than a check, and reads the same single line he's been reciting in his head for a week. "I'm fine, Ma. I'm driving. I'm doing it right." Down the lane, Sergeant Frank Malloy rolls his socks off and wrings Rain into the dirt. The white paint on his helmet has gone chalky at the edges, a kind of meadow of nicks and rubs, a record of hours instead of battles. He wiggles his toes, laughs once at the indignity of feeling human again, then pulls the socks back on and laces boots that remember him better than he remembers himself. He has a voice that can still a lane and a stare that can talk sense to fear. But in this pocket of morning, he is just a man warming his hands on a mug, while the road decides whether to be kind. Beyond the dump's wire, the countryside smells like wet hay and bread. A farmhouse door opens and closes with the careful hush of people who've learned courtesy from necessity. A girl stares past the hedgerow at the line of trucks and counts them without moving her lips, and Eddie smiles because counting is how you keep company with Miles. When he climbs into the cab, he pats the dash with 2 fingers like he's greeting a patient mule. Randall slides in beside him, with sleep still on his breath, and mutters, "Short run today, maybe." Eddie doesn't answer. He lets the rumor sit on the seat between them, like a spare wrench. If you reach for it too fast, you'll drop it. They pull out on the loop, and everything that made the past week a cliff feels, for a few minutes, like a hill. The lane breathes. Malloy blows one long, lazy note on the whistle just to see if the sound can be gentle. It can. The bridge still complains under the axles, but it does so like an uncle telling a story he has already told and will tell again. At the truck head, cranes swing with a rhythm that borders on grace. The clerk's pencil scratches a time that looks like a promise and doesn't feel like a lie. A repaired spur glints in the distance, and a short train rolls past with drums that belong to someone else's backache. Eddie watches it and feels the oddest thing. Permission to hope. He has earned nothing less. He and men like him, men whose names pile up in ledgers instead of in headlines, have kept an army moving when maps outran the rails and ports and pipes. He knows the arithmetic even if he never wrote it down. Gallons lost to distance, hours lost to rain, sleep traded for momentum, and then bought back with a shorter leg and a kinder gait. He knows, too, the part no one back home will see without being told, that most of the hands on these wheels are black, that the loop's pulse has the rhythm of voices segregated on paper and welded together by necessity. He thinks about how the road never asked his color before it asked for his courage, and how the road may be the only thing in France that didn't. He thinks about the day after the war, and wonders what will be remembered, the arrows on the map or the hands that kept the arrows honest. Malloy thinks along the same line, standing at his corner with rain crawling down his jaw. He has directed cavalry charges made of gasoline, and there won't be a ribbon for that. He accepts it without drama. The thanks he wants arrives each time a column clears his bridge and no one dies on the far side. But he lets himself imagine a quiet reunion, years from now, where a driver shakes his hand and says, "You kept us straight when the road didn't." He decides that would be enough. The loop runs, and then, just before noon, it does something small and enormous. It gets out of its own way. A rail shuttle shoulders a fraction of the weight. A pipeline posts a number and keeps it. The new truckhead chews through a stack of drums like a man eating bread after a fast. Red Ball doesn't vanish. It changes shape, from spine to ligament, from lifeline to bridge. Eddie feels it in the way his shoulders drop one notch and stay there. He feels it when he realizes he hasn't counted the distance to the next accident in the last 10 minutes. He feels it in the silence that falls between him and Randall, a silence that isn't empty but full. The lesson writes itself in the rhythm of the day. Trucks can win you time, but steel rails, deep water mouths, and buried lines win you endurance. Momentum is a miracle you manufacture 1 mile at a time until the heavy infrastructure wakes up and takes the load you were never meant to carry forever. Red Ball saved the week that had to be saved. In doing it, it showed, without speeches and without mercy, exactly where roads stop being roads and start being limits. Evening paints the dump in copper. Eddie nudges the truck into its slot, breaks down, engine off, the quiet blooming in his ears like sleep. He steps out and listens to metal tick as it cools. Across the yard, mechanics lean against a fender with that particular pride of men who have kept a thing running beyond reason. Malloy sits on a crate, boots off again, socks steaming faintly in the last light, smiling into the middle distance as if he can finally let the lane look after itself for an hour. Eddie takes his letter from his pocket and adds a second line with a stub of pencil pressed into a ration card. "We kept them moving. You'd laugh at how loud it was." September 1st, 1944, stays on the page in ink, but the feeling of it lives under the skin. The smell of diesel on rain, the whistle that turns chaos into traffic, the way a painted red circle on a board could command a continent for a handful of days. The trucks stand in rows with hoods up, canvas drying in the last of the light, like a choir at rest after singing a song no one else knew the words to until they heard it. The road that ate what it carried has given back what it could. The men who fed it have names that will take time to say properly. We owe them the time. The content of this video is compiled from multiple sources. If anything is incorrect or needs clarification, please comment below. See you next time.